like to call this meeting to order, the meeting of the Planning Commission of Dana Point, Monday, February 12th. And if we could have the Pledge of Allegiance offered by Senior Planner Nichols. Thank you. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Please let the record show that Commissioner Eric Nelson is absent. All other planning commissioners are present.
Thank you. Do we have anyone wishing to provide public comment to the Planning Commission for any item that's not on the agenda tonight? Okay, great. Moving on then to consent calendar. There are no consent calendar items. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. I did miss that. See, I should wear my glasses. Thank you very much. We need to consider the minutes of the prior meeting.
Thank you. There is just one small notation that needs a correction on the very last page under adjournment. Under I, item I. Actually, I want to give you all the credit. You are the one that actually adjourned the meeting at 6:35 p.m., not Vice Chair Murphy.
Okay, thank you. Good catch. So is there a motion in there related to?
Yes, I make a motion to amend the minutes as we have just spoken.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. If we could vote on the minutes. It's 4 yeas and 1 absent with Commissioner Nelson. Okay, moving on. Public hearing, item number 2, Coastal Development Permit CDP 17-0014, Minor Site Development Permit SDP 17-0023M, Administrative Modification to Standards AMS 18-001, to allow an addition and remodel to a legal non-conforming house on a coastal bluff lot located in the RSF 3 zoning designation at 34567 Camino Capistrano. Do we have a staff report?
Yes, Senior Planner Jonathan Ciampa will give the staff report.
Good evening, Chair McCann, Planning Commissioners. John Ciampa, I'm the case planner for the Thompson Residence Project. The project is located in the RSF 3 zoning designation. The site is improved with a 2,500 square foot 2-story single-family residence with a 3-car garage. Project site is located within the coastal overlay and appeals jurisdiction of the Coastal Commission. Just to give you a little background about this property, the house was originally constructed in 1972. The structure is considered legal non-conforming because it was constructed prior to current development standards and has non-conforming setbacks, which will be discussed later in the presentation. In 2008, a CDP was issued to the property for the demolition of the existing home and the construction of a new house. However, that approval has expired as of 2010. In 2017, the Planning Commission approved a coastal development permit for the repair of the settling foundation, which resulted in 21 deepened footings. This is the existing site and conditions of the property. As you can see here, it's a modest contemporary design from the 1970s. The project scope is to enlarge this 2-story house with improvements to the first floor, which include a 199 square foot first floor addition, 91 square foot addition to the garage, combining of the office and bedroom on the lower level to create a larger bathroom and bedroom, as well as increasing the roof height over the kitchen and dining room area. Second floor improvements include a 193 square foot addition, which would expand the master bedroom suite. If approved, the additions would expand the house to 2,900 2,894 square feet. The entitlements required for the project are a coastal development permit because of the project's location in the coastal overlay district, as well as a minor site development permit because it's proposing an addition of more than 10% to the legal nonconforming structure, as well as an administrative modification to the standards, or AMS, to continue the nonconforming setbacks along the side and front yard property lines. The coastal development permit conforms to all the applicable requirements of the city's local coastal program. The proposed improvements and additions comply with the city's development standards, with the exception of the requested AMS or administrative modifications to the standards. Public access exists approximately 270 feet from the subject site, and there are no impacts to public recreation or coastal access as a result of this project. This is a project site. No additions are being proposed within the 25-foot bluff setback. As you can see here, identified in red, that area is to remain unimpacted. The first floor addition includes expansion of the dining area towards the 25-foot setback. However, it will go to the setback but not beyond it, as well as in that bedroom area that would be expanding or combining the bedroom and the office that exists today into a larger bedroom and bathroom area, and then a addition along the south property line towards the property line, but would be set back 8 feet, which is in compliance with the required setback. As you can see here on the north end, the existing setback is 7.2 feet. As proposed, all of the improvements would be remaining at 7.2 feet, and that will be discussed later in the project. So this is the up close image of the first floor improvements. One of the improvements is to install folding door systems, 2 of them along the rear elevation to take advantage of the coastal views. As you can see here, the doors along the living room area would be located within the 25-foot bluff setback. However, there's no expansion within this area, and is essentially just replacing the existing doors and window system with this new window system, which would only result in modifying the framing, but would not result in any new foundations. As you can see, any new walls that are proposed here in the darker color are located behind the 25-foot setback. The second floor additions include a expansion along the south property line here, which would be maintaining the 8-foot setback and would be expanding the master bedroom and bathroom area. The minor site development permit is requested for the 15.6 square foot or 15.6 percentage expansion, which is a 483 square foot addition to the single family residence, which requires the approval of the minor site development permit. Structure is allowed to be maintained as a non-conforming structure because it is only demolishing 27% of the walls of the home, which are factored into the interior and exterior walls. So the threshold to require the house to be brought into conformance is 50%, so it is well below that threshold. All of the new additions, with the exception of the request for the AMS, do conform to the required setback requirements. So the administrative modifications to the standards are requested for 2 of the property line elevations. One is along the north elevation here. So as you can see on the right, we've got the existing elevation here. The request is to increase the pitch of the roof to have a higher ceiling area. So the expansion would not increase any of the floor area. However, it would be increasing the volume of the ceiling, and would be requested for a 10-inch encroachment to continue that legal non-conforming side yard setback. The other encroachment is requested along the front of the property line, which is for the addition to the garage, which is a 3-inch encroachment along the front to continue the existing legal non-conforming 9-foot 9-inch front yard setback. That would result in an expansion of 1.1 square feet within the setback area. Staff is found that the project is in conformance with the required findings, given that the project is in conformance with the city's local coastal program, as well as is in consistence with the public recreation policies and access policies of the Coastal Act, and the required findings for the coastal development permit, site development permit, and administrative modifications to the standards. Staff is recommending approval of the project, and the applicant and staff are available for any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Do my fellow commissioners have any questions of staff?
I guess one question that I have, just confirming, is that all of the proposed and existing deviations aren't changing, correct?
That's correct. None of the modifications as proposed for this project would be encroaching any closer to the existing setback. So along the front is 9 feet 9 inches. That would be remaining or being maintained along that wall plane,
Correct.
as well as along the side yard, which is a 7.2 side yard setback. So that plane would be maintained. So nothing is going any closer or exacerbating any existing conditions.
Okay, because you went through a lot of the numbers, but there are no physical changes in what they are from what they will be to what they are now.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
John, with the table one that you have shown, it shows the front setback, an asterisk of 9.99, and the 7.28, so you've got a 3 inch and a 10 inch deviation, which is existing. And there's no asterisk on the 23-foot from the edge of the bluff. Is that because there's no change there? The other ones are some construction?
That's correct.
Is it the same owner from 208?
Yes.
I have a question. You mentioned and made reference to kind of an eve encroachment on the north side. You said that the roof pitch was changing to create vaulted space interior, but the setback is measured from the plane of the wall, correct?
That's correct. So the actual, I'll go back to that slide. So this wall plane area here would be increasing in height. So while the roof is increasing in height as well, and the eave, the actual wall plane is increasing from the existing, because right now the existing condition is here. So it would be increasing in height approximately 6 feet to accommodate for the new roof design as proposed. So it'd be maintaining that 7 feet 2 inches vertically.
Right. So, but the eave itself, I assume frequently eaves are kind of exempt from setbacks as long as they're within a certain parameter, with 24 or 30 inches depends. Is that in fact the case here as well?
Yes, that's the case. The eave is considered an architectural projection, which is allowed to encroach. I believe it's 25% into the setback. So this would be well within that allotted amount.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions?
I do have one.
Okay.
In May of 2017, the property owner received approval to repair the house's setting foundation with 21 deepened footings. Has that been done, or is that something that we're waiting on?
So a portion of that work has been completed within the kitchen area. However, because the property owner decided they want to move forward with this project, a portion of the deepened footings where these additions are proposed will need to be relocated, and so those are kind of pending with this project. So the essential ones located within the kitchen area have been completed. So I would guess that there was probably about 2/3 of the deepened footings have been completed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, with no other questions, I'd like to open the public hearing. Is there anyone from the public that wishes to speak on this matter? Thank you. Carl Iverson.
Good evening, Commissioners. Carl Iverson, architect. We're dealing with a house that was built prior to the codes that are in place right now. And in trying to satisfy my client's requirements, we worked very closely with staff. Jonathan, Matt, and Ursula helped us a great deal. We worked together to come to a solution. We tried to satisfy all the city requirements, which I think we have done. The administrative modifications were requested because the issues were so minor, 3 inches and 8 inches. I mean, it was not a big deal. And we were staying in line with the existing structure. So we're not trying to make anything huge happen here. We're just trying to work with what we have. I think Jonathan's kind of outlined all the details in detail. If you have any questions that I might answer, please feel free to ask.
Thank you. Did you have a question? Ma'am?
Just a clarification. Because of the way you have structured this, it looks like there's no impact on the travel, the automobile travel that goes on Camino Capistrano. It looks like it's going to be
none
the
whatsoever.
same output.
Exactly the same.
Okay.
Driveways, nothing changes out there.
All right, thank you.
No other speakers on this item? Okay, with that, we'll close the public hearing and have commission discussion.
I'm favorably disposed to approve this project because it is in compliance with our standards. It makes no major changes to the existing footprint, and so I think it's an improvement for the neighborhood, and I think it's well done, and I'm favorably disposed.
Thank you.
I concur with Commissioner Donner's comments, and am in favor of this.
Thank you. Vice Chair Murphy?
Yes, I think this is a very good, sensible way to remodel, and it's particularly in that area up there. And certainly will be an improvement to the neighborhood, and it's not going to cause any problems with our, number of cars that go up and down from the bottom of the hill. Certainly, it looks like the additions are very nice, and they are appropriate for that particular street and that lot. So I'm in favor.
Thank you. And I'll echo the sentiments of my fellow commissioners. I as well agree. I think you've done a great job of kind of restraining yourself to stay within the parameters of that's already been established, and just extending those planes I don't see as a major issue. So I'll be voting in favor of this project. With that, I'd entertain a motion.
I move that we approve the Coastal Development Permit CDP 170014, Minor Site Development Permit SDP 170023M, and administrative modification of standards AMS 18001 to allow an addition and remodel to a legal non-conforming house on a coastal bluff lot located in the RSF 3 zoning designation at 34567 Camino Capistrano.
I second it.
Okay, let's vote. And that item passes. Congratulations. Good luck with your project. Moving on, item E, old business. There's no old business. F, new business, item number 3. Do we have a staff report?
Yes, and Senior Planner Sean Nicholas will give the staff report, please.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. Sean Nicholas, Project Planner. The item before you is a time extension of I can close this down, sorry. Is a time extension of a vesting tentative parcel map, as well as that was approved on February 22nd, 2016 by the Planning Commission, with a number of other entitlements associated with a new mixed-use project located at the corner of Pacific Coast Highway and Golden Lantern, where the existing Union Bank building is located. As a standard condition of approval, if within 2 years, if construction is not commenced and or an extension hasn't been requested and granted, the entitlements expire. On January 4th of this year, we did receive a request for an extension by the applicant. They have been progressing through the building permit process and also helping their tenants to relocate, which has necessitated the extra time needed. On January 10th of this year, a administrative time extension was approved pursuant to the Dana Point zoning code for all the entitlements except for the vesting tentative parcel map, because pursuant to the Dana Point Municipal Code, the Planning Commission, acting as the subdivision committee, must approve a time extension for a tentative parcel map. The required finding to grant the 1-year time extension is that the extension will not result in conditions or circumstances contrary to public health, safety, or general welfare. Staff has prepared a draft resolution, which is action document 1 before you this evening. Staff has not received any correspondence on the proposed request for a time extension, and with that, staff does recommend the Planning Commission does approve the time extension subject to the draft resolution presented, and staff and the applicant are prepared to address any Planning Commissioner's questions this evening.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions on this item?
Sean, could you tell me the status of the building permit process? You know, what has been done and what still has to be done?
Yes, they have submitted for all of their applicable building and engineering permits. As you can guess, there is a number of complexities to a project such as this, where you're going subterranean as well as above, with also all the water quality improvements and a number of the components in terms of supporting Golden Lantern and street improvements and sidewalk improvements that are going to be occurring associated with the project. So there's just a lot of moving pieces, and as I said, they've been trying to work with Union Bank, which is the main tenant at the facility, in terms of finding their relocation, in terms of moving them out, obviously, before they can start any construction there. So I would say they are nearing the end of, the permit process in terms of compliance with all applicable codes. There's still a number of things that they do have to check off, but they have gone through 2 iterations, and we are working again closely with the applicant and their architecture team to finalize those applications.
So in some of the projects, I guess I want to know if the city approval process is holding them up, or if they're just going through the process. Is that?
They're going through the process.
Thank you. Any other questions?
If I may just add a little bit of detail to that. So when you get your entitlements through the Planning Commission, you then have to prepare a much more detailed set of documents called, construction documents. Those often take months to put together after an applicant comes before you all, and the more complicated the project, the longer that will take. So they went through that process and they have submitted, and as Sean said, we've gone back and forth a couple of times. It's typically an iterative process, and the more complicated the project is, the more likely you'll go back and forth a few times. But I would by no means say that it's been slow, that anyone's been dragging their feet. It's moving along, I think, as it should. We get requests for extensions are not uncommon. We don't have a lot of vesting maps that come before us, which is why you're not necessarily aware of the requests for extensions. In this case, they have that, and that's under our code. It has to come before you for that extension.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. What is the status of the Union Bank lease? Because didn't we approve like the new project over on Del Prado?
Yes, sir, we have, and actually just met with them last week. They are still progressing actively at the new location on Del Prado. We just met to kind of look at some tentative designs for a new sign program that will be coming before the Planning Commission, and I believe they are looking for fall of this year to be open in that new location.
So, I'm sorry, do you know if a lease has been signed? That they are moving over there. That's inked.
Yes,
But it's just the process then of getting there.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great, thanks. This is a 1-year extension, correct?
Yes, sir.
Is 1 year enough time, sufficient time to get this other stuff done?
Well, I'll just say first on the other entitlements besides the map, there's an option, so the community development director can grant the first year extension. After that, it would come before the planning commission, so they get a maximum of 2 years. Sean, do you recall under the subdivision ordinance whether there's an option for a second year? I think it's up
Yep.
to 5 potentially.
I believe there is an extension off the top of my head, but I can tell you that the tentative map, which is a separate process in terms of the final map process from the construction documents, is very close. We just got what we hope to be the final CC&Rs revisions in, and so the 1 year, we shouldn't have any issues about the tentative parcel map either way, and then we are hoping, regardless, that we'll be fine with construction as well, and then there's options for an additional extension, as the director has stated.
Okay, great, thank you. And then in the resolution, proposed resolution, item C28, it references page 7. It references, if the building permit is issued during calendar year 2016, the fee shall be X. Was that a typo? Did that intend to say 2018, or was that carried over from the original?
That's a carryover. These are the original conditions that were reviewed again by the engineering division, and in terms of the conditions on the map. So these are all the conditions as originally approved, and then if there's any update in terms of the fees associated with, as the costs have changed, that they'll have to obviously be compliant with the most current up-to-date fee requirements associated with the improvements in the Lantern District.
Okay, but, so, I mean, it sounds like it's on Public Works, but shouldn't we be approving up-to-date things here? I mean, is it appropriate to, if the commission so chooses to approve this item, subject to a correction, a recalculation of that fee by Public Works so that it's accurate and updated?
So the way the ordinance is written is that it's due at the time the building permit is issued. And because we don't know exactly when that's going to occur, we can't calculate it yet because there's a CPI increase each year, so it moves up. And then there was, the city council adopted sort of a 5-year program of where it was discounted over time. So between those two indicators, so if they pull in 2018, it's one amount. If they pull in 2019, it's a different amount. So we're aware of how to calculate it, but it will be dependent upon when the building permit is issued.
Okay, I mean, it just to anybody looking from the outside, it looks a little funny in 2018 to have for a document approved in 2018 to reference if the permit is pulled in 2016. I mean, I'm just
If
wondering
I
if we
could
should
just read
update
the
it.
following line, I think that probably would address your concerns. It says, if the building permit is issued during a subsequent year, so after 2016, the fee shall be calculated pursuant to section of the Dana Point Municipal Code. I think that probably would satisfy your concerns,
Okay,
hopefully.
okay, hopefully.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have no other questions. Is there anyone wishing to speak on this item? It's not a public hearing, but we'll happy to receive public comment.
Good
Mr.
evening.
Ray.
Yes, my name's George Ray. I'm the basically project manager for the ownership of this project and was the one that got the project entitled. We do expect, in the long delay, had a lot to do with Union Bank. Their lease actually extends until June of 2019. And they've just taken their time. We tried to relocate them on a temporary basis, didn't quite work, and then they eventually found a site. So we kind of, we're working on it, but we were tied to them. But we do expect to, as they move out, we expect to have everything ready and hopefully, knock on wood, get started in the fall of 18. That's the plan.
Great, thank you. Okay. Does the commission have any comments or discussion on this item? Commissioner Opal?
No comments.
Okay.
Yeah, just a quick comment. When the commission was looking at this 2 years ago, was it 2 years ago? I think there was we had a lot of conversation about the possibilities. This is a huge crisscross of projects, and things really have to fall into place where they need to be. And I think it's doing that, so I certainly agree that we should just go on, let them do what they need to do.
Okay. Well, I agree. It sounds like they've been working diligently on moving their entitlements forward, working on their plans. This is a very complex project, a lot of different agencies and pushback. So with that, I'll make a motion to approve the time extension for vesting tentative parcel map VTPM 15-002 to merge two lots and to allow individual ownership of the project's commercial component only.
Second?
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. And that item passes. Congratulations. Moving on, item number 4, review and discuss draft story pole ordinance. I should mention before we begin that I received an email from Commissioner Nelson that he would very much like to be a part of the discussion on this item, not necessarily the staff report, because he feels like he can listen to it on the tapes. But he'd like to be involved in the discussion, as this is a policy type item. And so at the end of any staff report and so forth, I personally will be inclined to recommend a continuance to a future date when he can be involved in that discussion, since he's expressed a desire to do so. But with that, do we have a staff report?
Yes, Sean Nicholas is on the hot spot again.
Yes, again, good evening, Sean Nicholas, project planner. This is to review and discuss a draft story pole ordinance. On October 17th, 2017, Councilmember Lewis presented City Council with the draft story pole ordinance, which is the supporting document 1 provided in your agenda package this evening. After City Council discussion, the item was requested to be brought to Planning Commission for your discussion. So our goal for this evening is we're going to actually have the discussion from the City Council ready to be reviewed by the Planning Commission. So you can hear the presentation, the introduction by Councilmember Lewis, as well as City Council's discussion. Take any public comments should there be any members of the public wanting to discuss the matter, and then provide direction to staff. I just wanted to highlight, though, that any story pole ordinance that should go forward in the process would require a LCPA, which is an extensive process, as the Planning Commission knows, and has been outlined in your staff report this evening. Additionally, just from some background on story poles currently, before we watch the video, we do have 2 scenarios in which story poles are currently required in our community, one of which has to do with residential development in certain hillside conditions. The other is for new development located within our town center Lantern District. Also, it's important to note the city does not protect private views, only identified public views are protected. So with that, I will ask Ms. Shana if she could switch that over. Thank you very much. Thank you. That was it. Perfect. So that is the video, the recount from the October 17th meeting. If we could just, there we go. So again, at this time, any public testimony for any individuals here in the public that would want to speak on the item, staff would recommend hearing from them and then provide direction as noted earlier to staff. Also, I'd like to highlight that Councilmember Deborah Lewis is also here in attendance and prepared to talk about the issue as well as answer any questions in terms of her thought process on the ordinance that she's drafted. So with that, it concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you. Do my fellow commissioners have any questions of staff for this item?
The only question I have is there's an existing ordinance that requires it for certain hillside conditions. What is that stipulation? What is the criteria for that currently?
So there's a definition, actually it's located in our height measurement section under the general requirements provisions of our zoning code that stipulates if either front to rear, rear to front, or side to side if there is an excess of 20% slope between those areas. And they wish to go up to a third story up to 33 feet. There is a story polling requirement. So if it was still a hillside condition, but they were only proposing 2 stories, they would not be required to have the story polling. It's just when they wanted to take advantage of the increased height and story increase pursuant to having the hillside condition. It's involved also with preventing extensive grading, so on and so forth, to not impact, what could potentially impact or denude the slopes. So there's a number of components to it, but that's where it would be required in the residential.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Donor, do you have any questions? Okay. Vice Chair?
No.
I have a couple of questions. As proposed, do you know how many projects this would have applied to in 2017?
At this time, staff has not done that analysis, so I do not have a number for you at this time.
Okay. Does staff have any feel or calculation as to how much this would cost the city to administer, monitor, and so forth? If we were to implement?
Again,
We haven't done any internal calculations. A lot of the costs would be borne by the applicant in terms of the actual costs for the staking itself, and then it's hard to quantify time, but obviously there'd be more noticing and coordination required on their end. In terms of monitoring, we already do public noticing monitoring, so we could roll it into that. So I don't know if it necessarily increase our costs internally, but it would definitely increase the cost for the applicant.
Do we have an estimate as to that, what the cost of the applicant would be?
It really varies by the scope of the project. So there are a number of staking, story polling companies, but again, it depends on the height and the amount of staking and the number of days the ordinance would require that the staking occur on site. And then topography can play an impact on the cost. So if you're dealing with a steep hillside condition or a situation where they have to use, sometimes they use like cranes and larger equipment and need some temporary street closures, things along those lines, that obviously would impact the costs for them as well.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions. Looks like we have a couple speakers on this item. Council Member Lewis.
Thank you. Good evening. Good evening, Planning Commissioner, Chairman, and Vice Chair. How are you? Well, that was interesting. I didn't know we were going to do that, so please bear with me if I repeat some things. Story polling, as you know, is just typically required or used to depict elevations, silhouette, and proposed new structure, second story addition, or any addition that can cause someone to determine that there's inappropriate bulk or mass. So this really came to light for me, and it became very apparent and clear to me on September 19 of last year that without the story polling, we deprived impacted residents of a very important tool that allows them to assess changes that are happening in their neighborhood. As you know, change is always hard, and the unknown is unnerving and therefore often unwelcome. And their homes and their neighborhoods are their biggest financial and emotional investment. In that context, why ask people to imagine something that doesn't exist when we can easily help them visually evaluate the change that is coming to their neighborhood? On September 19 last year, the City Council, as you heard an appeal for construction of 2 detached dwelling units on each of 2 contiguous lots in a residential duplex zoning district on Villa Verde in Capo Beach. The residents were very upset about this particular project. In fact, so many residents expressed objection to the project before the council meeting that the council meeting had to be moved to the community center to accommodate all of the people who wanted to speak. Except for the architect, all the residents and attendees spoke out against the project. Almost exclusively, the complaints centered around inappropriate bulk, scale, mass of the project. After presentation and objections, council members themselves had to spend a great deal of time trying to understand the concept of bulk, scale, mass. There was a lot of discussion. What does that mean? What's bulk? Trying to understand. Staff tried to articulate, but really was unable to articulate a meaning that enabled some of the council members to fully grasp these concepts. And these were the key concepts upon which the complaints arose and the council decision was resting. So as you know, there is more involved, at least there should be, in approving a new building or remodel than simply the technical requirements, setbacks, the like. Section 9.05130 of the Dana Point Municipal Code says that site improvements shall, being the legal mandatory shall, be designed to create a unified, functional, and comprehensive site with an integrated architectural theme that is compatible with and will complement and enhance not just the project, but the surrounding properties. The second item enumerated in this code section is a factor used in evaluating massing and bulk. And the fourth is scale and proportion. So the code section has the decision makers taking those factors into account and then specifically incorporates by reference Dana Point's design guidelines. General principles of the design guideline on page 7 state, quote, every proposal should demonstrate that it has considered the contextual influences of neighboring properties and has made an effort to create positive relationships between existing and new development. And under building form and massing, the design guidelines state specifically, quote, building should be complementary in form and bulk with adjacent structures and the desired development patterns of the neighborhood. That's on page 8. I believe we do our residents a great disservice if we employ just tunnel vision. We cannot focus solely on numbers and ignore admittedly subjective but crucial criteria for our residents. We owe it to them, as we are their only vote in a matter that we fully understand their concerns and we take them to heart. We're impacting their neighborhoods and we are impacting potentially their quality of life. Most people, myself included, cannot visualize what a project will look like simply by looking at plans and an empty lot or a building that's there in existence, so even an addition that's already to an existing structure. Had the city had story polling, the neighbors and the council members on the Villa Verde project could have stood on the site and viewed live and in person the height, the silhouette, the scale, the mass, and the bulk of the buildings for themselves. They could have assessed with their own eyes the visual impact and the neighborhood compatibility. It may very well have taken away all of the controversy. In doing my research, I've looked at several cities' story pole ordinance. They're very similar to the one that's before you and addresses the same issues, helping neighbors and decision makers to assess projects' visual impact and compatibility before the project is completed. I also spoke with architects and companies that do story polling staking. In particular, I spoke with the owner of Coastline Story Poles. He's licensed by the state of California and has installed story poles all over California for both residential and commercial buildings. He told me that when it gets to 80 feet, that maxes out for him. After that height, it gets difficult and potentially dangerous. The story poles are used to, as I said, depict the bulk, the scale, and the mass, not to depict every little architectural feature. That's not what it's there for. Must have the outside corners and the highest ridge lines. Then people, he explained to me, then what happens is people who have an interest in that project, they take a look, they see that, and they go to the Planning Commission, they look at plans, they do further study to educate themselves if this is a concern for them, and that it's not realistic to ask story polling to depict each architectural feature, and in fact, this does not. He recommends using independent persons, such as a surveyor or an independent company that installs the polling to certify the story polling, that they have no interest in seeing the project approved, that they're objective, that they put the story polling in, and they certify that. He told me also that it was very useful to use black marks on the poles every foot in 1 foot increments. That way when people see it or neighbors, they're not sitting there and going, oh, it's too big, it's about this too big. It's objective, incremental, say, half a foot. It gives them a perspective and a measurement. And on hillside projects, he said it is good to mark where the finished floor will be. Otherwise, the building can look more massive than it would be when it's finished, because when it's finished, much of it will be covered with dirt. I also spoke with Councilmember Toni Eisman from Laguna Beach. She served on the council for 18 years. Councilmember Eisman made the same point about the importance of an independent certification. I asked her if there had been complaints about pricing and had that been an issue in her 18 years, and she had a one-word answer for me: no. In sum, story polls are useful as a tool to help our residents and the decision makers, particularly City Council when it comes to us, because this is not our expertise to determine these very subjective but crucial criteria. I believe it's also assists the decision makers who struggle to imagine a project's impact before it is built. I think there was one question that you had asked, I guess, about the costs. Okay, so we have just as a council passed the policy that the user fees need to be paid by the developer or the private party up to 100%, except in some certain exclusions that the city staff is working on. So in terms of cost to the city, the user will bear that fee, not the cost. I don't see incremental cost to the city because we are asking them to do story polls. Did you have anything else, as I recall, that you wanted to ask about?
Well, if you happen to know how many projects this was applied to in 2017, that was one of my questions.
Yes, I don't know, because I don't know how many projects there were in 2017. But, you know, what it's designed to do is look at changes. So, you know, if you already have a structure there and you're not adding to its height, you're not changing the roof line, you're not putting a building where no building exists. This isn't going to have you story polling just for the sake of story polling. If it's not changing any visual impact, then of course that would be superfluous, and you wouldn't require it to be done. And that's why these various requirements here, you know, in applicability are there. All projects that are to be reviewed by the Planning Commission, again, you know, that could be refined to be, just because it's in the Coastal Commission zone doesn't mean it needs to be. Obviously, if it's not changing any of what's there, then what would be the point of that? And I don't even know how you would story poll something that's already there. So item 7 could be you know, massaged for that purpose. Anything else?
Does anybody have any questions for Councilwoman Lewis?
Yeah,
Vice Chair Murphy?
thank you.
Hi.
Hi. My question has to do with, there were a couple issues. We're dealing with, obviously, the zoning codes. And I don't know myself how these kinds of changes would affect the zoning code. Would the zoning codes need to be restructured before such a change is made, if it is made? Or which comes first?
Well, I think the draft ordinance or some version of it would become part of the zoning code. So a new section would be added to the zoning code. And so it would be an amendment to the zoning code, which is what is necessitating the local coastal plan amendment.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not sure that it would really affect any other sort of standards or provisions of the zoning code.
And as I think Mr. Nicholas said, we're in that process now. We're in the second phase of not just the typographical and the cleanup, but actually in the process of amending some of our zoning codes, so this could slip right in there. In terms of town center, I did want to address that. That is in Measure H. It says very specifically, you know, it was in the original town center plan, so it's not like Measure H added it. The original town center plan did require story polling. Measure H just put in a little more detail. So, but that is required in town center. It's required on hillside. So this just gives people in the rest of the city that same sort of tool, so they can see how this is going to impact their neighborhood, and we can help them with that visual. Anything else?
That's all I have right now.
Okay.
This isn't so much as a question as is a comment. My perception was on Villa Verde that the main issue that the residents had was a fear of parking, and a number of residents and parking congestion, not the architecture of the home, the size, the height, or any of those things. That's my impression of what that's what I got out of hearing that item twice from the residents.
Okay, well, I guess, my take when I heard people saying things like bulk, mass, it's too bulky, it's too massive, it's too big, and then the city council really spent probably half an hour, I'd say, going over, well, what does bulk mean? What does mass mean? How big is this thing? So it was an issue. I mean, parking was an issue, but I think the overall concern was that it was 2 duplexes that they were 4 bedrooms each, that they were taking up these 2 contiguous lots, and they were pretty much lot line to lot line, and that this project was going to be big and massive compared with the neighborhood.
And just for sake of clarity, because I had the privilege of attending both public hearings, or all 3 public hearings, that certainly before the Planning Commission, those issues were not really raised, and they were raised more at the City Council hearing, so.
Yeah. Oh, so you were talking about it at the Planning Commission?
Yeah,
Oh,
we heard
okay.
the item twice.
Okay.
And, you know, for the record, we didn't reject it, but we continued it with a strong recommendation to work with staff on it the first time.
Okay.
And so we had 2 public hearings on the item
Okay.
and heard a lot of resident feedback.
Yeah, we had, what would you say, 25 people came out, 30 came out and spoke, and almost to a person, that was the overarching issue. Parking was, of course, included, but I think probably pretty much everybody was saying, thing is too big. And I think, you know, my feeling was if we were able to see it, it may have lessened that fear and given them a perspective that you can't have when you, I know when I look at a plan, it looks big because it's spread out on this, you know, huge paper, and it looks like a massive project. And then you hear, oh, it's 4 bedrooms, each one, what were there, 4 buildings on there? On 2 buildings on each lot, each one 4 bedrooms, 12 parking spaces. So I mean, just when you hear the parameters of the project itself, it just feeds into that this is a very big project. So.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for your presentation.
Yes, thank you.
I do have one more question for staff. Have you guys considered, requesting applicants to put up story poles like on a case-by-case basis? Because I kind of feel like this is a blunt instrument that's just going to hit everybody in the city over the head with, whether it's in some area that's not, doesn't seem particularly sensitive to it, whereas maybe there's other cases or locations where it could be more applicable and effective. Have you guys thought about that?
I will say from a staff level, the only conversations we've really ever had about story polls were relative to the town center plan. In that, prior to Measure H, as Councilmember Lewis mentioned, that there was a reference to staking projects, but there were no provisions or process outlined. So unlike the Hillside ordinance, where there's a very prescribed process that you have to have them up for so many days, for a certain period prior to the hearing, et cetera. None of that was contained within the town center plan. And when the, now known as the Raintree or the Prado West project, but it was being referenced as the Majestic project, when that one needed to be staked, it was a really larger, substantial project. It was a redevelopment project where you had existing buildings, and it was very difficult to stake because of where you had to put the cranes on the public right-of-way, which Public Works had a lot of concerns, safety concerns about people being able to utilize sidewalks, et cetera. The cranes were up high in the air, having to kind of dodge around these existing buildings. So it was actually, logistically, it was very difficult and very expensive. And around that time, there were, I think that project went through three public hearings. And so it was at a time when there was a lot of questions being asked about the town center plan. So we actually brought the author of the plan, Boris Dramov with Roma and Associates, into town, and he participated in a sort of public workshop with the community. But we sat down with him ahead of time to sort of talk about that provision in there. And his opinion was that actually a physical model or a massing 3D model would be a more effective tool to show scale, mass, bulk, et cetera. And so we took an item to the Planning Commission at the time, which nobody on the current commission was on that Planning Commission, and suggested that unless a height variance was being requested in the town center plan, that a model be provided instead of staking. And we had direction from the Planning Commission at the time to go that route. So that was the only really kind of discussion that the city staff has ever had about staking. In other parts of town, it's never really come up except in the hillside conditions.
And if I can just add that we have had in the past, in the context of very contentious projects such as the Doheny Hotel, we've had developers voluntarily agree to stake the property while we were going through the public hearing process. So on a one-by-one, although we have not had a broader staff level conversation, we have required voluntary compliance as the project moves through the public hearing process. And most developers, when they're going through that process, have been agreeable.
That reminds me, actually, South Shores Church did the same thing. They voluntarily decided to stake their project as well. Thank you, Jennifer, for that reminder.
Thank you. And I see
So,
Councilman-
yes, if I could address, okay, so for me, it's balancing developers against residents. When there is any conflict, who should take priority? And for me, it's our residents. If it costs the developers a little extra, well, so be it. Our residents deserve to know what's going on in their town. And if people voluntarily do it, then having a requirement wouldn't change the outcome. If they're willing to voluntarily do it, then, and having that as a condition really isn't a hardship for them. You're talking about people who are spending potentially millions of dollars. The thousands of dollars that we're talking about is not the difference between people who are going to do a hotel and not do a hotel, or do a fourplex and not do a fourplex. But for the people who are living there, it makes a big difference. And you talk about sensitive areas. Well, every area next to me is a sensitive area. So if it's next to you, it's a sensitive area. If it's down the street, it may not be a sensitive area. The Via Verde project was not a project that had a view or that had anything other than people living there who saw a change that they didn't understand, that they feared, that they said was too big, and that is what made that sensitive. So I see that if I'm going to balance, and it's even close, I'm going to go in favor of the people that live here. Thanks.
Thank you. And I noticed I missed Mr. Iverson. Did you want to speak on this issue?
If I might. Carl Iverson, architect again. Councilman Lewis has asked me to speak a little bit on this because of my experience. Last 25 plus years of my practice have been primarily based on Laguna Beach, so I'm very familiar with the story pole staking. I'm very familiar with this whole process, and I'm very aware of its benefits and its drawbacks. It's a tool that everyone gets to use, and it's a tool that the community gets to see. There's been addressing this Via Verde project. This project is in my neighborhood. I know what was going on there, and I was one of the people who spoke against it because of its bulk and mass and the impact in the community. The majority of the community had no idea what was going on. I mean, they just saw the pictures on the paper. To imagine something like that is difficult for most people. I mean, like Councilman Lewis said, I can't imagine, she can't imagine it. If you put story poles up, all of a sudden you have an image, and an image is worth 1,000 words. We could talk about it all day long, but once you see what it's going to look like, you can draw your own conclusions from it. To make it mandatory, I think, is really a plus for this community. I mean, I live here. I live in Capistrano Beach, and I'm very familiar with the process and the progress that is being made in our neighborhoods. To give the community the ability to see what's being added is a huge tool. It clarifies things. Councilman Lewis again mentioned at the meeting, at the community center with the city council. I mean, there was easily half an hour, 45 minutes spent with two councilmen just explaining to them what mass meant. Mass and bulk. I mean, they couldn't grasp the meaning of that. If there were story poles up, they would have immediately seen what that was. So it would have cut all that out. I mean, it gives you the image. Again, a picture is worth 1,000 words. If you see it, you see it. If you try to imagine it, you're going to imagine it different than you're going to imagine it, different than the guy on the street's going to imagine it. So again, this is a tool that will benefit the community. The cost involved. The developer is going to absorb that. Again, like Councilman Lewis said, if you're doing, we're doing $1 million remodels. To spend $2,500 having it staked so that the community, your neighbors, can see what you're really proposing goes a long way to make the neighborhood more integral. Everyone can see what's going on. The cost, again, it's minimal as far as the developer in relation to the project cost. The cost to the city, in my experience with Laguna Beach, in all these years I've worked with them very closely, there's really no impact financially at all to them. They monitor it, yes, but that's part of their code process of monitoring what's going on. The developer puts them up. They pay the price to have them put up. They also put up a deposit so that when the entitlements have been granted or denied, those poles come down. They don't stay up there for years. They come down. The developer gets his money back. Simple process. You do what you said you were going to do. As this is written, as I'm reading the applicability of this purpose and et cetera here, it's well written. A new structure, additions over 50%. Yes, they should be staked. I mean, let the neighborhood know what's going on. Second story additions to an existing structure, definitely that should be staked because everyone sees what we're doing there. The bulk and mass again is seen. This is very well written. And as far as being the design review authority, that's you guys. Now, Laguna Beach has a design review board. It's a contentious process you have to go through at times, but if you look at the overall beauty of Laguna Beach, it's had a great effect on it. It's made things happen. It's made property values go up. It's made everyone happy. Stop that. It's a plus for the community. I mean, you guys are the design review committee, and you guys can do what you need to do. I think you're aware enough of what's happening that you can make your proper decisions. It's a plus. I mean, really, it's a plus for the city. And it's only an addendum. Like Ursula says, it's only an addendum to the zoning ordinance. Nothing's really changing at all. They're not rewriting codes or anything. They're just making an addendum to it. So from my opinion, a guy who's in the trenches a lot, it really solves a lot of problems. And it's not that big of a deal. Thank you.
Thank you. I did have another question or two of staff. Have you received a lot of complaints about lack of story poles?
I'm not aware of any.
Not in the projects that I've been involved with. We get 3D modeling, or we require visual renderings to have photorealistic is the tools that we have typically gotten, especially like when we did the WAVE project, and for some of the other projects that we're working on, we're looking at more 3D models and photorealistic, so that way they're put in context and scale. So okay. I hadn't heard anything in terms of those projects about story pulling.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to address that. When the Majestic project went up, many of us, I mean, literally, we were filling the community center, begging that this be story polled. I personally went to the city council at the appeal and said, please, story pole this because we want to see what this looks like. This thing was staked one day, 24 hours each building on July 4th weekend with cherry pickers and a string with some flags. In fact, I was at my house and I saw this out of my window and said, "What is that?" And then it was gone. I went to the bike shop and said, "Are you guys having a sale?" I thought it was flags for a sale. And he told me, "I think it was the city doing that." Nobody knew what was going on. Nobody was told. Nobody got notice. And we all wanted to see it staked. And we couldn't. And the city council refused to do it. And that was one of the reasons Measure H put in more detail on the story polling, because we were told, well, it met the requirement, it was staked, it only needed to be 24 hours. Sorry, it was July 4th. So yes, people did complain a lot. But a lot of people don't complain about something they don't know that exists. So it's not like you go and say, gee, if I had story polling, that would really help me. But once people know that it's available and see it, yeah, I think you would get people complaining if it wasn't done. Because it is, as Carl said, it's a picture's worth 1,000 words. And why would we deny the opportunity for our residents to have that tool? So, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for staff? Okay. Hearing none, I would, in respect of Commissioner Nelson's request to be involved in a discussion at the commission level, I would move that we continue the item and its discussion to the next regularly scheduled meeting of the Planning Commission.
I would second that.
Okay. Is there any discussion on that item or motion?
Yeah, before you go to that, one of the things that in the neighborhoods, in the associations, community associations, there are story polls required in all of them. And the big issue in the neighborhoods are views. So although we don't have a view ordinance, I think that is an issue that that some of the things that we're talking about need to be, I think if we could look at before our next meeting, maybe the staff could look at a few things with the neighborhoods, what they do and how they do it, because there are requirements. You have to put it up. It has to be up a certain amount of time. And some of the same things that are here. And I think that it's positive to have it, but there are also, what are the downsides? So before we leap, we also have an existing requirement in the town center. And we're saying, well, if we have that in the town center, can that be expanded to the rest of the city without making a new, a completely new proposal? So maybe there's a way to get there, and I think that's something that the staff should work on before we have our next discussion.
Okay, that's, I think, a good point. And actually, I had a couple questions. How burdensome would it be to try and get answers to the questions I had relative to how many projects, which, as written, would it have applied to in 2017?
That won't be too difficult. We should be able to get that rather quickly. I think exploring what the various HOAs require, that will take a little bit more time. And so since this isn't a public hearing, that was a required notice, instead of continuing this to the next Planning Commission meeting, if perhaps you could amend your motion to direct staff to bring it back once we've completed this research and just agendaize it that way, because I'm not sure that we'd be able to, particularly in exploring the various HOAs, have that ready by the next meeting. But we would commit to bringing it as expeditiously as possible.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say the city also, when they proposed to put the Surf Museum in Sea Terrace Park, When I went before the city council and asked, they did stake it, but they were staking it to show us there was no view problem, but that wasn't the problem. So sometimes in Villa Verde, the other thing that people that live there, I don't know if they were aware, but the size of the property was significantly greater than the size of the properties they were being compared to. So the residents that I talked to were concerned about the size, but they also were concerned about how many people were going to live there and how many cars were going to be parked there. And I think when we sent it back saying, well, the problem we have as a city is if it meets the requirements, saying, well, this is what's required, and to say, well, we don't, the residents don't like it. I think that's where, when we sent it back and the staff worked with them, we got a much better project. But I'm not sure, although I support story polling, that wouldn't have solved our problem in this case because people didn't want it for the number of people that are going to be there and the amount of cars that are going to be there. So I support story polling, but that wouldn't have solved Villa Verde. But so that's my take.
Thank you. I think that's probably wise to give staff adequate time to get us some answers to help, better frame the issue with fact-based information. So I would amend my motion to have staff kind of research those questions as requested and bring it back as expeditiously as reasonably possible as they see fit. Would you support my revised motion?
I accept that.
Okay. Should we vote on that item? That item passes 4-0 with Commissioner Nelson absent. Thank you. Moving on. Staff reports, item J.
Shane, is there anything I should be remembering at this moment? No. There is a homeless forum tomorrow, which perhaps Commissioner Murphy is going to speak more about, but she will be definitely engaged. That's tomorrow at what time, do you recall? 6 p.m. at Capo Beach Church. So it's a community-wide forum. Tony Rakakis will be there to address the public about some of the changes in certain laws, legislation that have impacted homelessness, as well as a couple of other speakers. So if you have nothing else to do, it should probably provide a lot of useful, interesting information. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner comments.
I took my family to Dolphin Dave's, and it was fantastic. With the windows, the grandkids could see the dolphins going along in underwater. Filmed it, and it was absolutely fabulous. So we have so many great amenities here that we saw whales, we saw dolphins, we saw sea lions, and the kids really got a kick out of it. Plus, so did the grandparents.
Commissioner Opel?
No comments, thank you.
One, I'd like to make an unofficial motion that they somehow fix the thermostat so that people who come in here. It's unnoticed, so I don't think I can. But now, personally, I don't normally have a problem, but I know all the women in particular always. Ursula looks like she's going on an Arctic trip usually. I'm surprised there's no scarf today. So that's one item. I love reading the Dana Point Times. Every week when it comes, I'm super excited to get it. And I was super impressed this week where 17 kids from Dana Hills were signing letters of intent, athletic letters of intent to colleges. And I had no idea that there was that many, and I thought that was fantastic. And it was great to see, you know, that they were all, you know, moving on and achieving excellence athletically. So I want to commend that. And I noticed that there's talk on like the geology of the area coming up this week that looked really interesting to me personally. So I'll probably be abused for that comment, but anyway, and I just want to make one other comment that, you know, like Commissioner Donor, I mean, I'm just continually struck by how beautiful the area is and how great the city is, and I think it's fantastic. So those are my comments.
On the same vein, the geology, I think that's at where's that taking place?
Obviously, none of us are.
Oh, it's at the community center. It's at the community center. It's at the community.
I think it's at the community center.
Community center, and I think it's this week.
Yeah, I think it's like Thursday.
It's like Thursday, it's a
Yeah,
science night.
yeah, and it looks. Yeah, it looks very. What?
Science night?
Yes.
They have it once a month,
Yes.
every Thursday.
I was kind of asleep there, and it it sounds absolutely extremely wonderful and intriguing. And to your point, Commissioner, I've been walking as I normally do the headlands, and the flowers are coming out in the brush. Now we have little yellow flowers and little white flowers, and I know most people who don't live here would think, yeah, you're wasting my time talking about this subject. But it's just such a thrill for, I think, all of us, because that area is so near and dear to all of us, and it certainly is one of the crown jewels here in Dana Point, and more people who visit here are introduced to that, and they do get to stand there and watch the you know, all the fish and fauna go by, and you know, we're pretty darn lucky.
We do, and I have one more thing to add that actually triggered. So if you saw the new Lookout magazine, which is the new community guide, it's been redesigned. So I'd like to publicly acknowledge Sheena's efforts on that. So it's, I think, beautiful. So Sheena took a big role in the redesign of that. But there's a great spread in the middle picture, 2 pages, of the yellow flowers at the headlands. So actually, when you see that picture, it's pretty breathtaking with the ocean in the background. And I think everyone will want to go take that hike and take a look at it. But excellent job, Sheena. Thank you.
With that, one more thing. This is a test for Commissioner Nelson. He said he was going to be listening to the thing. So if you hear this, Commissioner, let us know. Otherwise, we'll know you were not listening to the whole thing. With that, I'll adjourn the meeting to the next. Oh, do we have a meeting coming up in 2 weeks? We have an item or two.
We have to bring our annual housing element report forward, so that will for sure be on the next agenda, and there's likely one other additional project.
Okay, great. So with that, I'll close this meeting until the next regularly scheduled meeting on February 26th.